Hello, welcome to the Building Living Soil workshop at Delectable Tiny Gardens. I am Vicki Manitou Okas, and I am going to guide you through my process for developing living soils in tiny spaces. And here at Delectable Tiny Gardens, we support people looking to develop food and herb resiliency in tiny spaces. So I invite you to come and join us, and let's get started on the workshop. It's time for me to get nitty gritty and down into it and down on the dirt and talk you through what I did when I set up the raised bed here and what I do when I set up container gardens. Okay, so let's get into it. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to disturb that system, because you need to kill what's there. You need to destroy what's there in order to create what you want. And rather than, I've got two issues here. One is the soil, the base soil, it really is not suitable for growing gardening plants. Okay. It's barely suitable for trying to tuck a tree into it or a bush into it. It's definitely not suitable for planting a garden. So we created a raised bed, and that raised bed is about 3 foot wide by about 20 foot long. And honestly, that is plenty of space to grow enough food for a family for the summer, for the season, if you plant it right. Okay, so we'll start with there. But the first thing I do when I am working with this kind of a challenge is get rid of the grass and the weeds. Okay, and I do that by laying down cardboard. Because I'm creating a raised bed on top of it, I lay down the cardboard. Okay, and weight that down, and I put the raised bed on top of that cardboard, or I put large containers on top of the cardboard. But the space that I am going to be working in, I kill back the grass with a barrier that is going to choke that out. Okay, and cardboard is something that will eventually degrade back into the soil and not cause permanent issues. Okay, there are some exceptions to that, so do your research for your space. Okay, that keeps the soil structure intact. It keeps the soil life intact. The grass and weeds are killed, but they also become part of the nutrient base for the soil and the soil life. Okay. Next is the fill that space. There are a lot of ways to fill that space. I'm kind of cheap. Okay, so I start in the fall with tossing in at the bottom of the bed wood trimmings, bark from the vine that I'm making baskets out of. So anything that's kind of woody and slow to break down, that's what I put in the bottom of that bed on top of the cardboard. Okay. In the fall, I fill that bed full as I can with leaves, grass clippings, anything that is a little bit more herbaceous that is just collected and thrown into that bed just to sit and degrade over the winter. Okay. And I filled it. Okay. I collected grass from a mowing from the empty lot. I collected grass from the trees in the neighborhood, and I just filled that bin. Okay. That is not in and of itself a good growing medium. So in the spring, I brought in some garden soil from outside, okay, and a compost. So What I put on top of those leaves and grass clippings and stuff that I filled the bed with over the winter is about 4 inches deep with about a 50-50 mix of decent garden soil and composted manure or a compost mix. Okay. That 4 inches deep is enough to plant most annual plants in. Okay. And as long as I keep enough nitrogen in that mixes in with the stuff that I put in there before. Um, and honestly, the grass clippings and leaves kind of balance each other out and create a better balance of nitrogen, carbon than one or the other by itself. So I mix the two together to fill the bed. In the spring, I put in the soil compost mix as my growing medium for that year. Okay. Then after I plant it or in the planting process, I mulch that soil with either grass clippings, if I can get grass clippings that are weed free, okay, weed seed free, or if I can get a hay that has not been sprayed with herbicide, the grassy hay, then I mulch that bed with that grassy hay, and that forms the base for that raised bed. Okay, that process actually encourages the earthworms to come in from outside. Okay, if I need to, I can seed it with earthworms. Okay, and this year I probably will. Okay, it encourages the microbial life. Okay, and I don't turn it over. I just let it sit and do its thing. So the only thing that I'm disturbing is that 2, 3, 4 inch layer on the top of of the soil that I'm planting in, and I let nature do itself. Nature take its course there. I let the life in the soil do the work. I repeat this as needed. Okay. And the other thing is that I'm setting up a composting system inside. So right now I'm in the process of setting up worm towers in the raised bed and in the large barrel gardens so that the composting is happening in the bed itself instead of in a compost pile. So whether you're using a compost pile or whether you're composting in the bed, either way, that compost is important for the life and living soil, for the balance in the living soil. Okay. Now, that is on a medium size scale for the 3 foot wide by 20 foot long raised bed. You can also develop the same type of system on a micro scale. So in a micro scale, smaller containers than like a whiskey barrel, so smaller containers, I would use more organic material and less mineral matter, and definitely let a lower clay content in the soil. So if I'm working with a small pot, like a 5 gallon bucket, I really don't want any clay content at all in that bucket. I do want the mineral content, but I want it silt and sand, not clay. And I want it to be organic matter dominant in that bucket or in that container. For a microsystem, I want that worm composting separate from the container itself. So whereas in a barrel, a whiskey barrel or a 55-gallon drum, you can put that composting system in the barrel, or in a raised bed, you can put that composting system in the bed. when you're working with a smaller container, you want that worm composting separate from your container. Okay. The other part is that in a micro scale and in a small container, I am much, much more cautious or careful about the selection of the plants that I put together. Right. So that they are actually working harmoniously from the start instead of a lot of guesswork. Yay. There, and the other part of a small container garden is that you really need to be a little less tolerant of some of the aspects of soil life. So while ants and some of this stuff is very healthy for a raised bed or a larger system, that's really not that healthy for a small container garden. So you want to be a little bit heavier in management with the life that gets established in that container, so that what you have in there is microbes and a little less in the earthworms and a little less in the ants and stuff. So that's the earthworms and ants and some of those other insect macro soil life is not so good necessarily in a smaller container. So, and you're also going to actually be turning that soil and recycling that soil more in a 5-gallon smaller container than you are in a raised bed or a large barrel. Okay. I also use less mulch in a microsystem. I always add organic matter and I keep adding organic matter, but that is more, I do that in the form of worm compost and other compost. Um, if I need to, I grab some weeds outside and create a fertilizer tea out of the grass and weeds outside in order to feed that microsystem. Okay. So that is, I mean, like I said, there's every time you're talking in generalities, there are things that you need to tweak a little bit to make it work for a specific situation. But the basics are always the same. So no matter what level you're working at, you're always working towards that living soil. Okay, so we've done a lot of talking about creating a living soil. Okay. But we do need to take a few minutes and talk about what kills a living soil. And honestly, I've got an example right in front of me of what happens when you kill the life in the soil. And I'm going to show that to you right now. Okay. This is a pot that I put some rosemary in, and I have been trying to grow microgreens in this pot all winter. And it hasn't been working. And I have messed with it and I have messed with it. I have added organic matter. I've added nutrients. I've added nutrient teas, coffee grounds, uh, all kinds of messing around. Okay. Now, since this is supposedly an organic basket, okay, it's a grass basket, this should have rotted into nothing long time ago. Okay, so you take a look at this. All right, this basket is almost perfect. There's no degradation on that basket whatsoever, even with plants and soil in this for almost 9 months now. Okay, that should not be. And The plants in here are not growing. They're barely germinating, let alone growing. And even the poor little rosemary is not happy in this container. Okay, what that tells me is that there's something toxic going on in the soil in this container, and I'm going to say it's the basket. Okay, I'm going to say that this basket was treated with something to inhibit um, bacterial growth or fungus, bacteria, mold in the basket itself, and that is affecting the soil. So what I'm going to do with this, I'm going to dump this out. I'm going to get rid of the basket. I'm not going to use it again. I'm going to try and pull the rosemary out and try to save the rosemary. But the rest of this, it's just a greens mix. So I'm just going to pitch it and we're going to start over in a different situation. But this is what a non-living soil looks like when you run into it. It just doesn't work. Okay. So what kills a soil? What kills a soil? Okay. The things that kill soil, all herbicides will kill soil. And it takes it out of balance. Okay. Whether it flat out kills the soil or not, it will take that soil out of balance. Even the natural herbicides take your soil out of balance if it doesn't kill it outright. So, I mean, you can kill weeds with vinegar, you can kill weeds with salt. There's a number of other things that you can use to kill weeds, but it will take the soil out of balance. Okay. All pesticides have the potential to kill the soil, and most of them do. Okay. Some of the exceptions to that are the bacterial-based pesticides, such as BT. But you even need to be careful with neem and tobacco, which are also organic pesticides. But both of those can be highly toxic, and they can damage the soil life as well. So even if it's an organic pesticide, still be careful with it. Okay. Some plant compounds can be toxic to the soil, or at least some parts of the life in it. Things like cedar, walnut, living walnut, and some other plants discourage other plants to grow next to them, and you need to be aware of that. So it's not that they kill the entire soil structure, and they don't kill the soil in general, but they can create a toxic environment for some of the plants that you might want to grow. So be aware of that. Okay. As in this basket, any treatment that is designed to prevent rot will create a toxic soil environment, and it will inhibit the growth of the plants as well because of that. So fungus wood that's treated with fungicide, okay, green tree, a lot of these other treatments, oil-based treatments, will leach into the soil and create a potentially toxic environment for your plants. And toxic soil kill the soil life in general. Okay. The other thing that I run into that kills the soil and kills the ability for the plants to grow in that soil is toxic water. Okay. The water here is treated with chemicals that inhibit growth, kill bacteria, inhibit growth, and inhibit rust, inhibit degradation of the pipes. All of that stuff creates a toxic environment for your plants. So you got to watch your water source, because that also causes problems. So yeah, those things are, if you're aware of them, are actually fairly easy to avoid. Or in the case of this basket, just start over. Okay, it's not worth fighting with it anymore. So once you run into that environment, it's best to not create that environment in a larger space. But if you run into it in a smaller space like this little basket, just start over. Start over. Okay. This soil can go and fill something where it's not going to be a problem. Okay. Now, there are, let's talk a little bit about other possibilities for creating living soils other than what I've talked about, because there are a lot of different techniques and practices that are going to work in various different places and in various contexts, and they're going to require some research from you and to see which ones are going to work and which ones are not for your specific situation. So hugelkultur is a practice of adding large wood into a garden structure for it's a woodland type. It creates a woodland type structure of your soil, but it also helps with water management and it creates a beautiful living soil. But it's not necessarily going to work in every situation. Okay, the Aztecs created a system called, if I'm not probably not going to pronounce it right, but it's Chinampa. Chinampa. Okay. If this is a swampland or wetland gardening technique where you're bringing, it's also called the floating gardens of Mexico City. All right. That's a Chinampa system. And that is bringing soil up to create a system where you're growing up above the water line. You're creating your gardens above the water line, but you're actually growing on a swamp. All right. A donut garden is frequently used in semi-arid areas, but it can be used in a lot of different contexts, or sometimes it's called a keyhole garden. And what you do is you take create your garden in a stair step, and in the center of that stair step is your composting system. So all of your garden scraps and everything go into that center composting system, and it feeds through your stair step garden. And you've got a keyhole where you can go into the center, and you have access in a circle around your garden. That is the base idea for the worm tower that I'm going to be putting into the raised bed and the barrel gardens here. Is that donut garden or a keyhole garden? Okay. A lasagna garden is a reasonable method of setting up a garden. Okay. And it does work under the right circumstances, but it doesn't work for everybody and everywhere. Okay. Sheet mulching is what the primary practice that I use rather than a compost bin, because of the time that it takes to manage a compost bin. Okay, so that is where you're using balanced nutrient materials to mulch your garden. That's another way of saying that is sheet composting. Okay. Chop and drop is another viable and popular technique where any weed that you chop, as long as it doesn't have weed seeds in it, you just lay it down for mulch. And I do that all the time. So if I pull it out of the garden as a weed, it goes right back into the garden to compost and work back into the soil. And it acts as a mulch so that the next weed seed does not germinate. Okay. Cover cropping is a way of adding nutrients and organic matter to the soil. Okay. Terracing is, under the right circumstances, terracing is a beautiful gardening technique. It naturally captures moisture, it naturally captures nutrients and soil and creates a beautiful soil in place over time. And that is, works for rocky ground, untillable ground, and steep ground, and it is beautiful when it's done. When it's done right, it's absolutely gorgeous. So the last thing that I'm going to cover, and I'm going to show you part of it. I'm not going to pull out the worm bin today, but I'm going to show you what that living component of the soil looks like. And I'm going to put this down. I'll leave this here. Okay. So what I did is I've got my worm bin in a crate in the kitchen, and every couple of days I throw vegetable scraps in that worm bin for the worms to compost into a living fertility for the soil going forward. And right now it is just about ready to start using the compost. So I'm going to show you the living component of what the living component of a soil looks like. All right. So what I did was I pulled out a little bit of that worm compost that I've got in the kitchen and put it in here for a little, just to hold it for a little bit to show. Okay. I'm going to dump it in here. And what I did is I took a couple of handfuls of that worm compost and dumped it into that container. And that is the living portion of a living soil. Okay, I just fed these worms a couple of days ago, and you see the worms in here. There. Okay, there's a baby. Okay, lots and lots of worms in there. Okay, in just that little couple of handfuls of soil. All right, there is all kinds of microbes in there. There's fungus, bacteria. Okay, and those worms they don't like the sunlight. They don't like me messing with them, so they're trying to find a hidey hole, trying to get back into the soil. Okay. But that is what the living component of the soil looks like. Everything in this tray is the living component. So you've got apple peels in there. Okay, a few eggshells in there. A little bit of broccoli. Okay, the worms, bacteria. Okay, and I started this with cardboard and paper, and then the kitchen scraps. Feeding the worms with the kitchen scraps. So then you're recycling all of that good nutrient into beautiful, beautiful garden soil. And you can see you see all that beautiful fertility that is ready to be used in my pots and gardens. And what I'm going to look to do is create the same system outside in the garden beds so that the soil in the garden beds become a living soil on their own with this type of a system. These are red worms. These are more of a composting worm. I will use native worms outside so that they have a better survival over the winter. But there you go. And basically that's it for creating a living soil. It's just a matter of knowing what the basics are and then nurturing that system. It's not complicated. Okay, but once you understand what the system is and how it works and how it cycles, it really is not difficult or complicated to create a living soil. It pretty much does it on its own as long as you're nurturing it instead of sabotaging it. All right. So, what do you think? How do you nurture the cycle of life in your space? How do you nurture the life in your soil so that the soil nourishes and nurtures the plants that you're trying to grow and the vegetables and life that you're trying to create for yourself? Resiliency, sustainability, food security, it all starts with nurturing that cycle of life, and it all starts with the soil. So tell me what you're doing. Tell me in the comments, and like, subscribe. Come and join us over at Delectable Tiny Gardens, the meeting place for people looking to develop food and herb resiliency in tiny spaces. So thanks for joining me, and hey, we'll talk to you next time.